Welcome to Belonging Reimagined. I'm your host, Dr. Mona. As a mental health therapist, professor, and researcher, I guide folks in owning their belonging journey and exploring barriers to belonging. In this podcast, I explore real stories with phenomenal guests about how to experience both interconnection and interdependence. And my hope for you is that you learn ways to experience more connection in the world around you and the world within yourself. We don't have to do this life thing alone. You're right where you belong. All right, folks, today we have a very special guest, at least to me and to the people that know him. My very own partner, Mark Stone, is joining us. And Mark is here today to talk about a subject that I know he knows, whether he wants to be in the spotlight or not. Too bad. Happy wife, happy life. So he's here to talk about belonging and gaming, because we have in the house a gamer, maybe a former gamer, because he doesn't get to do it as much these days. But there's a whole thing that's going on in the world right now and has been for a while, as far as gaming. Like, we have kids, I hear parents all the time say like, oh, my kid just wants to stay on the computer all day and game and doesn't have friends and, IRL in real life. And we're going to get into that. We're going to get into what's going on. Mark and I are both parents. And so we've been there, but Mark's also a gamer himself. And I used to be a little bit of a video gamer back in my day when I was much, much, much younger too. So let's get right into it. Thanks for being here, Mark. All right, here's what I remember. We can save how we met for a different day, but I'm going to give you some of my earliest memories of you. This is back in, gosh, what year do we meet?
95, 96, we were trying.
1995. Oh my gosh, we don't even know. We met in 1995. And apart from like when I first met you, some of my earliest memories of you were going over to your apartment because we had mutual friends. You and I weren't dating or anything like that at the time, but we had mutual friends. And I remember going to your apartment and seeing a completely different person from the person that I met outside of that space. And so when I met you, you were very quiet. You didn't talk very much, if at all. Sometimes we would be in social settings. I literally never heard your voice. And then those moments when we would get to your apartment and just kind of drop in, I heard screaming, I heard swearing, I saw jumping up and down in front of a television with moving cars and cartoon looking characters, completely different individual. And I was like, is this the same guy? So I'm curious to hear from you. How did you even get into gaming to begin with?
Oh, that's a long story.
We're here for it.
But I think a relevant one, especially nowadays, considering people nowadays. When I was younger, I had asthma, very bad asthma. And before I was hospitalized for asthma, I was playing soccer, I think age 8, 9, around there. So that all kind of changed when my asthma got to the point of where I could no longer participate in sports. And so I didn't realize at the time, but that was the only real time I had any kind of, things in common with folks around me. I moved around a lot as a kid. That's another story. So I didn't have like a friend group that I kind of grew up with. On top of that, I was also autistic, ADHD. I didn't know that at the time, but it made social interactions really awkward, made connecting with people really awkward. And it didn't take me long to figure out that whether or not someone liked me or not, or had any kind of interest in me. And so once soccer was gone, I was really kind of alone. I didn't have friends in school. And so I would start playing video games. They were kind of new at the time. Atari and Nintendo shortly after that. But I just started playing video games. I loved the puzzles that gamers, software designers were bringing. It just kind of appealed to my interests, honestly. So I would stay at home and just play video games. I didn't have to deal with the mean kids. I didn't have to deal with social interactions, awkwardness, and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of started, I don't know, the development of an identity, like a gamer identity, the ones that we
Mm,
see, so stereotyped now with, the kid in their mom's, mom and dad's, house basement, just sitting there playing video games. That was kind of me. I was in my room.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and, we think a lot of times of gaming now in terms of community oftentimes because kids will say, like I was saying earlier, that they have better friends online that are nicer or who are nicer to them than the ones at school. And that's kind of similar to what you're saying in terms of like how you had a space that was safer for you to just be yourself. But at the same time, gaming was so different back then because it was new and there was no internet. And so there was
yeah,
no online community of friends. But what it
right.
sounds like when you're talking about like a gamer identity is that while you might not have had community, you were learning some things about yourself, kind of going back to like what I was saying initially, that I would see this completely different
Mhm.
person, when you were playing a
And
video game
a
and a
freedom.
freedom. So that's what I'm curious about. Like, what were you noticing about yourself, if at all, that might have been different back then? I don't know that you were screaming and all that at like 8, 10 years old necessarily, maybe.
No, I didn't have lungs to really, but that was like the beginning of like the gamer identity. I started to realize I was really good at them. The hand-eye coordination was a part of it, but also being able to solve the puzzles. Um, and looking back at it now, not all of us can be star athletes or even great at sports. A lot more folks are going to be better at hand-eye coordination on a video game than they are kicking a soccer ball or throwing a football or whatever sport. It just requires so much more physical dexterity that a lot of us don't possess. But this is a space where I could perform, um, and had fun doing it. And that was like the first stage of it. And then once gaming started to evolve, I would have my parents drop me off at the arcade, and I was starting to get really good at games, so much so that I was in tournaments, and it was you know, it was like the first time I had like a community. Um, I was known as Street Fighter 2 was the game where things started to change for me. I used to compete in tournaments and win them, and this is a kid with asthma who had no friends. Couldn't participate in sports, wasn't popular in school. But when I went into these spaces, these arcades, people knew me. People were scared of me. Not that I want people to be scared of me, but they were like, "Oh shit, here comes Ken, the character I played." And it was a competitive game where you could knock somebody off the game by beating them. And when I came in the arcade, everybody was like, "Oh shit, all right, well." And they would play against me to try and get better. So it was
Mm,
kind of cool, and some folks wanted me to teach them too. So there was a lot of stuff happening, a lot of experiences I was having, and social interactions I was having that were nowhere near reflective of high school or even in my neighborhood. This was like a safe
yeah.
space for me.
Yeah. And the thing is that we as adults have so many different options as far as the spaces that we can go into. We can go shopping, even if it's window shopping, we can go into that space. We can go, we can make new friends. We can join meetup clubs. We can go to restaurants whenever we please. I mean, I know we have jobs and, you know, different restrictions in that way, but generally speaking, we have a lot of agency as far as our environments, and kids really don't. So we have so
Yeah.
much diversity in the kind of exposure we have in our day to day lives. If we want, at least there's the option there, but kids really don't.
Hmm.
And we put so much pressure, I think, on adults for kids to be this one certain way in life. But the only place they really have most of the time consistently that they can count on is school and home. And those aren't always great experiences for kids. Oftentimes they don't have
Yeah.
either place as a safe place for them. They might not have
Yeah.
the option of being in sports either because of financial reasons or logistics where parents can't get them to sports or for physical reasons like what you
Hmm.
described. And so that really limits like the parts of ourselves that we get to first of all see, right?
Hmm.
And if we can't see as much, then it's harder to have a deeper embrace for ourselves because maybe like the person that's showing up at high school ourselves is like shy or scared or whatever it is, but that's just one facet of who we are. And so we might struggle with that part of ourselves. I don't know if that's making sense to you, but what I'm hearing from you is that you had this whole other world that you could go into that gave you an opportunity to explore who you were and like see these different parts of yourself, right? When we go to the belonging model, seeing yourself, then you really embrace those parts. And then you were celebrated by other people, which makes it,
Yeah.
nobody
Well,
like turns down being clapped for every now and then, you know.
especially 3, I know.
An Enneagram 3. Yeah. Mark's an
Yeah.
Enneagram 3. If you want to go back and listen to Dr. E's episode, that was pretty fun.
Yeah. So much a 3. And to your point about seeing yourself, it got me thinking about how I didn't have the opportunity to see myself reflected back from other people
Yeah.
until I was in these gaming spaces. Um, they saw me in a different light. I never thought of myself as a teacher or even like a role model for some of these younger kids who were watching me play this game. It was truly an experience that I don't think I could have manufactured or even dreamt of until I was actually in it and I was kind of thrown into it. Just because I couldn't do things that normal kids could do or whatever that is. But it's interesting because now the gaming community, talks about belonging. Um, One of the games that I eventually got into, Eve Online, is very much based on the player community and how involved it is, and how it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, and it's worldwide now. Like most of the games online, you have such a reach, and you can play with people from completely different cultures, and there's the sense of belonging in this game of trying to slay the dragon or research a spaceship or compete on the esports team. It just brings so much more possibility and creates so much more space to belong, and
Yeah.
it's really tripping me out. And now I can see why kids are so drawn to their online community, and it comes with pitfalls too. There are folks that there are haters online, and it's important to talk to your kids about some of that stuff because there's some dangers online as well.
Mhm.
But as far as belonging, the possibilities are truly endless. It's really a trip to see it expand and to think back when the internet wasn't even a thing.
When we think about like the communities that we were kind of stuck with, or even the ones now, um, I'm wondering for you, Mark, like how you see gaming communities as being different from other kind of communities, even ones that we might like.
One of the most important times in my life was when games went online because I was a big gamer. I think we've established that, but I mean, I was into it hours a day, um, uh, just because that's where I found myself being drawn to. That's where I felt safest. That's where I felt like more authentically myself. There was a game called MechWarrior 4 that I was just kind of playing because I loved the big walking robots. Who doesn't like big walking robots with guns and stuff? Anyway, um, so I picked it up, started playing it. It was one of the first online games, the competitive games, and this was back before, gosh, there were other servers that could host these big tournaments. We had to kind of work with what we had, but I got recruited by um, another team to play on their team in a league that was worldwide, and we ended up winning this thing 4 times, 3 times, I think, in 3 years consistently. And for me, the experience was gosh, it goes back to someone chose me. I was, yeah, in high school, or this is right around high school time, but after high school or in high school, none of my school experiences I was ever chosen by any team except for the math team, and that was really cool. Um, but yeah, no one really chose me. And this was the first time I was being chosen for something because I was good at it. And there's something that happens when you feel like someone's choosing you to be on their team. Um,
Mhm.
that was like, that was my big epiphany in gaming, because it was a community. There was about 20 of us, I think, that were on this team together. And we, played these matches across the world online, of course. But it just provided an experience that I couldn't have even really dreamt of anywhere else. And I think it goes back to the possibilities you have in gaming that you might not be aware of, and it created a space for me to be myself. I could yell at the screen. That's when I was yelling at the screen.
You could yell at the screen.
They were great. I mean, it was exciting. I felt important. I felt like I could contribute to a higher good. Um,
Yeah.
and
It's
and
like
that
you
was
felt
important to
valued.
me.
It sounds like you felt
Valued, yes,
valued.
that was it. That was it. And not
Yeah.
just for being good at the game, but we had a good time we were on comms like this, um, back when it was like normal or
Mhm.
easy. Um, but and everybody's differences, it didn't matter what their racial identity was, or gender identity. Any of that stuff did not matter.
Yeah.
Political identity, everybody was there just to support one another and to beat the other team, pretty much.
It's interesting that you're talking about, like basic ethnic backgrounds, demographics, right? How there's a
Mm.
broad range, is kind of open in many ways, is the way you're describing it. But there's this kind of stereotype that when we think of a gamer, we think of, a teenage cishet white boy.
Which I was, but my teammates weren't.
Okay,
Mhm.
interesting. And so
Yeah.
just right away, even back then, you're saying that that stereotype was not your experience at all.
If I think back on the demographics of our team of about 20 of us, I don't even think half of us were cis white het men or
Mm,
male identifying.
okay. So you had mentioned dragons and robots in the games, but also Street Fighter. There are also people, right, who are in these
Yes.
games. And so, what have you noticed about diversity, equity, inclusion, even belonging amongst the characters that are in the video games?
So that's evolved. Um, Interestingly, and I never thought about this until now, Street Fighter took characters from all over the world to include a Brazilian, um, almost like a beast looking person that
Which that's
used
interesting that that would be put together,
it,
being
it is.
brown and being a beast, right?
Well, yeah, and he was green too.
Mm,
Interesting.
yeah.
And I think now I'm really thinking about it. It sounds like they were trying to pull in different cultures, and I think this was a Japanese, was it Capcom? I think it's a Japanese company. So there's this Japanese lens
Mhm.
on these characters from across the world. In fact, Ken, the one I played, is blonde hair, blue eyed. He looks like a Ken doll. Honestly, now that I think about it. Um, and also there were characters from India, and they were kind of stereotypical, but at least they were in the game. It wasn't just a bunch of white characters running around.
Which begs the question, is it worse to have fake representation that's really tokenizing us?
Right.
For me, the answer would be yes, being
Yeah.
Egyptian American. When I see things, like I can remember, Mark, I don't know if you remember this, when we went to our kids' elementary school for an event,
Oh, gosh.
and they had in the library, as you were
Monkey.
walking into this library event, yeah, it was a stuffed animal, it was a monkey. And on the monkey, it had almost like the crown that King Tut has, right?
Mhm.
I don't even, I'm Egyptian, maybe I'm supposed to know this. I can't remember what it's called. But basically, like the gold headdress that he wore, at least as far as we know. And it was on this monkey, literally on a monkey. And
Yeah.
King Tut's Egyptian. And so that is equating Egyptians to being monkeys. And while it was intended to celebrate supposedly Egyptian culture, it felt horrible. And our
Mhm.
kid looked over and looked at me and pointed and said, "Mommy, are they making fun of us?" And got tears in their eyes over it. And I said something to the school about it, like, "Hey, that looks like King Tut's headdress on a monkey. And that doesn't feel so great." And they were like, "I mean, but it's Egyptian." And I was like, "Wait a second.
Oh
No,
god.
it's not." And so as you're talking about these characters, um, it kind of is giving me that same icky vibe.
Mhm. Yeah. And this was, let's see, this was in the 90s, um, right around 90 to 92. And fast forwarding to Eve now, um, something I'm seeing in a lot of games is this, and they didn't have the technology back then, and probably not even the thought to, but now you can create your own character that has any range of characteristics from you can literally make this character look almost exactly like you, so you can
Yeah.
put yourself an avatar or a representation of yourself into the game, which of course makes it easier for you to see yourself in that game as that in Eve you'd be a corporation owner or a pilot or whatever. um, and it brings, not only does it allow you the creative expression of who you want to be or how you see yourself, but it just includes so many more, different backgrounds. As as you were saying, Street
Yeah.
Fighter 2, I think they took, it was like a comic book almost, and they used all the stereotypes from around the world and put them in a game, so that maybe, their thought was that, you can play the character you most associate with. Well, I don't know how that worked, but it definitely
Yeah.
looked like they missed the mark. Um, but nowadays, it's interesting to see how games are trying to cultivate belonging, Eve especially.
Yeah. Because I'm wondering how represented you felt that you were in the characters when you were growing up. Even being a
Mm.
straight hat, white, cis man, it's like, does
Yeah.
that necessarily mean you felt represented?
Yeah, it was easier for me to see myself reflected in video game characters. And I think that's a big difference between then and now. Street Fighter 2 versus a game like Eve where you can literally create your character to look like you.
Because even back then, a lot of the times the characters were seen as or created to be like, these kind of cool kids, right? Like kind of popular. It was the sense that you would get from them. And I mean, I'm wondering
Mhm.
if even then you could really relate to that? Or maybe they weren't like that. I don't know.
So that's an interesting question because of all of the characters I go back to. Okay, so for Street Fighter 2, that just because that was like one of the first times I could really experience games in that kind of community. Um I would play the character that most suited my style. Um
Mhm.
there's probably a whole psychology between why I chose Ken over um, you, which is RYU, the other character who was white in the game, who looked just like me. In fact, I dressed up like him for Halloween once because it was like he looked just like him. But I didn't like his fighting style. I liked Ken's better, so I ended up playing Ken all the time. And I had a couple friends who were in the same community who played Chun Li, the I think she was a Japanese Chinese fighter, because they liked her style of fighting better. So it's almost as if we were identifying more with the character's fighting style than we were the visual representation of them.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know if that makes sense, but now
Yeah.
when I'm thinking about it, I'm like, well, that's why I chose Ken. I mean, I always felt like I should play Ryu because I looked like him, but um, I always stuck with Ken because his style was, I could just, it's almost like I could feel him.
More of the essence, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And so, you know, let's switch to parenting for a second because
Mm,
we have parents who are so frustrated with
yeah.
their kids.
And I
We're
was
like,
too.
as a parent, you're talking about
Yeah. I was like, you got to get off that game. But also, I get it.
kids at school are mean, y'all. So mean.
Haven't
And
changed a bit.
I mean, there are times where it has felt like gaming has, I've seen kids, I'll put it that way, where it felt like gaming was actually a saving grace.
Oh, I was thinking the same thing when I,
Yeah, where it's like, okay, kid goes to school. Like I've had clients who have this situation, right? Who they have children and their kid goes to school, bullied all day or ignored all day, which is a form of bullying. It's like passive bullying, being super mean to kids. Kids are feeling left out. They're feeling undervalued, not valued at all, kind of back to what you were saying, um, unseen, not
Mhm.
loved, not cared about, and not a sense of community. And they're feeling really isolated.
Not
It's true,
included.
not included. They're feeling completely isolated ultimately.
Yep.
And then they come home, and parents want them to like, boom, 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 get on your homework, get on your schoolwork,
Yep.
get that done. And it's like, kids need a break from that oftentimes. They need to feel that sense of connection. And I'm not saying that gaming is the solution for every kid, but I have definitely seen
Mm.
where when we kind of helped parents put some time limits and say, hey, when you get home, especially these kids who are struggling, when you get home, if you want to get on the game for an hour, hang out with your
Mhm.
friends, great. And we have seen these kids have a lot of these kids have a complete turnaround and be able to feel like happy and relaxed and feel like school is just this place that they have to go to for, a big part of the day, but that they have other parts of their lives that they can count on. And I have firsthand see this make a huge difference for some kids. But
Yep.
that has been a learning process. It has been a learning process. You and I have talked about it over time, but I am curious to hear. We haven't talked about it in a minute, especially knowing this episode was coming up. I'm curious to hear kind of where you are with that now.
So when you were talking, I was reminded of an experience that our kids probably had at least at some point in his gaming career to where I was at school or in society being ignored, bullied, whatever. I come home, sit down at the computer, I log on, and my teammates say, "Thank goodness you're here
Oh, that's so true.
because we need you for a drop. We need you for a match." But still, there's that. Oh, thank God you're here. And the juxtaposition between being pushed around at school and thank God you're here. We were happy to see you, even if it's the win against the other team. There's still that joy and that excitement to see you, and you're not getting that from any place else besides maybe your parents, um,
If even.
if even because they have their own lives or whatever the situation is at home. But you sit down and you get that, and it happens more than a few times. You're like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to get back to my friends, to people who are happy to see me. My God.
Yeah.
And so knowing that our kids having that experience at some point or another, I can remember when he came in and told us about his first tournament win. I was like, man, I
Yeah.
bet that felt fucking awesome. And he was
Yeah.
so happy.
Yeah,
And
he's good. He's really good.
oh, I thought I was good. I'm like, damn. But we think about well, I think we're starting to recognize the positive benefits to mental health for being a gamer. And I
Yeah.
think, that's where I eventually got in talking with you about it too. It's like, I spent a lot of time in that game. And also, mentally, he's doing a whole lot better because those kids at school suck.
Yeah.
you know?
Exactly. Yeah, it's so true. And we're not picking on any particular school. You don't know which one we're talking about. This one's been gaming since basically birth. But yeah, so it's interesting how how we as parents have had to evolve in that understanding. And at the same time, when do we start to worry and say, wait, is
Mhm.
this like game addiction?
Yeah.
Is this a problem? When do we start to worry that this is a problem, do you think? I mean, you don't have to speak from an expert perspective, but just from your own lens.
I think looking at behaviors from other substance use disorders or folks who are addicted to something else. I think once it starts to interfere with schoolwork, um, maybe social situations. I think when there becomes an impact in you know not getting their homework done because they're playing a game instead, or showing up to work late because they're in a tournament. I think once the priority shifts more towards your life revolving around the game as opposed to, well, did I say that right? Once the game becomes too much of a priority, once that experience starts to impact your work or school negatively, I think that's when things might start to look a little bit more out of balance.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking about it like when you can't do like regular daily functioning, like
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
not showering or you're not eating for days or like you're skipping school because there's a tournament like
Mhm.
frequently, right?
Yeah.
Or where you don't know how to socialize at all.
Mhm.
um
Yeah.
or even when there's disconnect from people who are loved ones who really are there for you. I mean, a lot of kids also use gaming because they might be fine at school, but then they get home and things are disruptive at home.
Mhm.
And they literally wanna put headset on so they don't hear people screaming and yelling and fighting in the background and arguing,
Yeah.
because that in itself is really upsetting. And so, I think there's, like, all different kinds of situations where like, all kinds of reasons why people game, and it's not always necessarily something negative. It could just be that they
Yeah.
like school, they're fine at home, they have other activities, and they like playing games because that's just another source of community or friendship or just being able to, celebrate their own skill sets or build it, just like playing an instrument, for example. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, I mean, I'm thinking that maybe when it becomes disruptive to other parts of their lives,
Yeah.
and there's some kind of like self-neglect now that happens, um, that
Yeah.
could be problematic because it might disrupt school if they're
Mhm.
not able to get enough, social time. Maybe it is, maybe they're not having enough time gaming, and that's, that they need that time so that they can like unwind. And I remember that was an issue in our household for a minute. And it was funny because once we said, okay, yeah, you can get on games after school for a little bit, like kids started making straight A's. It's kind of wild. It's counterintuitive, but there were also restrictions on that. It was like, and as long as you're getting your schoolwork done before you go to bed, but I'm not going to micromanage the timing that happens. But yeah, it's a fine line. It's a fine line. And so, like, what can we as parents do to help our kids find that balance?
I think probably one of the most important things is to authentically check in with your kid just to make sure that they're doing okay. Um, because you brought up a really good point about why some kids do game more than others, or
Yeah.
why they do find so much safety in gaming. And if it is some kind of coping mechanism, then of course that kind of changes the dynamic. and maybe some of the intention behind trying to help them balance things, because you wouldn't want a child to go through their entire adolescent life just playing video games and not really interacting with folks outside of that, because then they don't have the perspective that's going to help them in society. Um,
Right.
so I think just checking in with them and seeing how they're doing, genuinely and consistently is probably one of the best things you can do, because you just don't know what's going on with your kid unless you're talking to them.
That's so true,
And
Mark. Yeah,
and
that
it's
is
so
so
important.
true. And when you're doing that, what I'm also hearing is like really building your own relationship with your kid, like taking that
Yeah.
time to spend time with them. That's another place of belonging. Like I know that's been our experience at least. It's like no matter how bad school is, I know I can come home and hang out with parents who are going to sit and chill with me. And it doesn't always have to be heavy. We can talk about light stuff. We can talk about funny stuff. We can watch
Mm.
reels together, and laugh about it. We can even talk about politics. Like we can talk about all kinds of things in the household, and having that open relationship is a whole other episode, right? In terms of
Yeah.
parenting, but having a
Yep.
place where your kid does also have a sense of belonging within the family with at least somebody, even if that's with a sibling. If it can't be
And
a parent for some reason, there's so many reasons why it can be tough for us to be there in the ways that we want to consistently. And I'm not judging anybody for it. I know that I myself went through postpartum depression and I just couldn't emotionally be there in the same ways that I wanted at one point. And there are some parents who are working multiple jobs. They are there for their kids, but maybe not in the same ways that we're talking about. But yeah, having that sense of connection with your kid so that you can like check in and see how they're doing. I mean, that's huge. And
mhm.
switching gears a little bit here, but we also have, like, I know you and I have clients. Mark is a therapist too, folks. Um, so you and I have clients who are experiencing loneliness. Are there, and they don't identify as gamers. Could gaming be a way? And I've never even actually thought about that until right this second. Could introducing clients to games be a way to help them build community or feel part of a community?
Oh my gosh, it's so timely that you asked that question. So for some of my clients, I don't think a lot of my clients are ADHD, autistic mothers with ADHD,
Mhm.
with also autistic and kids with ADHD, or some intersection of those different neurodivergence. And as time is so hard to manage for them for
Yeah.
a multitude of reasons, not only because of the needs of their children, but also their own sensory needs. And so gaming is, I don't think that gaming would be a good community for them. I think more of like Facebook groups or some other form of community where they can share their experiences, because a neurodivergent mother raising neurodivergent children is such a um, it's an experience, and it's not one
Mhm.
I can fully understand because I'm not a mother. Um, but my other clients who are ADHD and either not parents or have the time, gaming has been one of the biggest turnarounds for them. I mean, I've seen some of my clients who have smiled for the first time because they were invited to join a gaming group after
Mm,
rediscovering um, that they can find joy in games, whether
yeah,
it's because they learn how to approach it without burning themselves out, or they're managing their own oversensitivities before they start gaming so they don't like crash in the middle of it, um, and, like become overwhelmed in the middle of it and have to stop playing. Um, it's really big. In fact, I think some clients, it can literally help them find joy again in their lives. It's huge.
I'm going back to the like the ADHD or autistic moms, right? I'm going back to that for a second. I'm like, wait a second.
I do have one of the one of my moms does play on her phone. She plays a game on her phone. Um,
Yeah.
I might start exploring that a little bit more.
Honestly, now I'm giving you ideas. Well,
Hmm.
because I'm thinking like it feels kind of, I'm gonna just call it what I feel. I
Go
feel
ahead,
like
go ahead. I
it
don't.
feels a little sexist. I'm not gonna lie. It feels like, well, wait a
Yeah.
second. I can I can play games too. you know? I mean, and I'm starting to think about like, why didn't I do this sooner? Because gaming doesn't have to be like, something that's going to add more stimulation to the brain in a way that feels not so great. Like for me being
Mhm.
autistic, like I don't want all the like first of all, I don't like firearms and all those kind and all the sounds and all that. But like I would love to sit down and be part of a community where I'm playing like something that's kind of like intellectual, for example. And then everybody's different. Some people might like that. But I mean, it would be fun to be like in a community and playing like some kind of like harder card game, for example, online, or something like
Mhm.
that, or a word game, or I mean, even maybe some of the like fighter games or some of the others, I don't know, but like strategy kind of games. I think that would be really fun to do and could help me kind of unwind. Maybe it's like a cross where they have like autistic moms or ADHD moms or moms of ADHDers or something like that. And we all get together and whoop each other's asses.
Ga- Well, it's interesting because that experience can be so. There is something about, okay, so going back to Street Fighter, there's something about just being able to. I don't want to say aggression, but when we get overstimulated, it's just energy building up in our bodies, and
Right,
you know, how we choose to release it or express it is really yeah, really important. I mean, you can't go punch a wall,
right.
or maybe you can, but maybe a better, I guess, a more therapeutic way to release energy is to hit, yeah, beat somebody up in a video game.
Right, it's like punching a
It's
bag in
possible.
real life, right? Like, you're
It
getting
is,
some of that
yes,
energy out, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. So
It's not harmful, it's not harmful.
yes, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something to think about.
Yeah,
I mean,
we need to get on the couch and think about this and talk about this a little more because we need to explore this for our clients. Because 'cause I'm thinking this could be a good way for them to, just have that human connection, which is what belonging really is, you know?
it's huge. It's huge, and when you can find it in a space in spaces where you can kind of naturally fall into place. Um, I think that's when you found something that works for you.
When you think about yourself as a gamer, Mark, because I know we're going to have future episodes. And so I'm going to ask my favorite question here of the episode that I always ask last, but I'm asking it from the lens of a gamer, right? Of
Yeah,
a lifelong gamer now. What does belonging mean to you?
I'm going to answer that with what it looked like for me. What it looked like, what belonging looked like, is when I logged on to MechWarrior and the guy said, "What have you been up to today? How's your day going? You want to jump in a match?" And I'm like, "Sure," because I didn't. Uh, I had the freedom to express how I was doing if I wanted to, or I could just hang out and not think about the stressors of the day. And I knew that I was going to have a good time with them because they were happy to see me. They were genuinely happy to see me.
You know what it sounds like to me? Like belonging means being part of the fun.
Oh God, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and, and just it was just genuinely being able to sit and relax and just enjoy that present moment without any of the other stressors, noise, problems, anything else. It was just fun, being able to have
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. Like a get together or a party that autistic folks would even like to go to. That's when you
I'm
know it's a
one.
good party. You know it's a
Yep.
good party when that happens. Thank you for being here. You know that I love you. I adore you. You are my best friend in the entire world. And I learned so much from you. And it's fun just being able to sit together in this way. I really, really did enjoy it. And I actually did learn more about you today, believe it or not, even though we've known each other 50 gazillion years, even though we couldn't figure out what year we met. But I appreciate you and I love you. And thanks for being here, Mark. It's a great episode.
I love you. Thank you so much. It was fun.
All right,
Maybe
I'll
this is
see you in
where I
the other
belong.
room. Yo, oh, maybe that's where you belong. Uh-oh, folks, new podcast possibly coming. All right, I'll
Oh
meet you in the other
no.
room. We'll talk about it. See you in a minute.
All right.
All
All right.
right,
Bye.
love you. Bye. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. All of the show notes and links can be found on my website at drmonanour.com. That's drmonanour.com. Throughout most episodes, you'll hear me referring to the belonging model that I developed, which is represented by a belonging life map that helps you explore areas in your life where you feel more connection and areas where you might feel more isolation. And you can get a free copy of your own belonging life map on my website. Again, that's drmonanour.com. If you like the Belonging Reimagined podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a review. That can help more folks find us and keep more episodes coming. Until next time, I'm Dr. Mona. You're right where you belong.